Hello, welcome again to the BLYTHE Bookshelf, and I'm going to be talking today about another series of books which was a great feature of my childhood, and they are the William books by Richmal Crompton. Some people call them the Just William series, although I think there's slight dispute about that, because Just William was the title of the first collection of short stories. It's just and then a dash and then William, but William is the hero. The William books are what they're generally known as. The author Richmal Crompton, a lot of people when they start reading the William books believe that Richmal Crompton is in fact a man, because the name sounds like a man's name. Richmal Crompton was actually a woman. Her full name was Richmal Crompton Lamburn. She was born on the 15th of November 1890, and she died on the 11th of January 1969. So she died just 6 months before I was born, in fact. And I first discovered her books in the same way that I discovered a lot of the books that I used to read as a child, in Tenterden Library and in Maidstone Library. And like the Jennings books, like the Doctor Who books, they were sort of comfort reading for me. I kept coming back to the same ones in the series. But when I started buying them and having my own copies to own, that was when I sort of looked out for new books in the series. So a little bit about the author then. Richmal Crompton was born in Bury in Lancashire, and the name Crompton comes from her mother, Clara. So Lamburn was her surname from her father. Her father was Reverend Edward Lamburn, and he was a classics master at Bury Grammar School. And Richmal had an interest in classics as well, and she wanted to study classics at university. She had actually an offer to go and study at Newnham College in Cambridge, but in fact she turned that down in favour of going to Royal Holloway in London, where she was offered an annual scholarship of £60, which was a lot of money back then. She became a classics teacher for a while. She was a classics teacher in both Lancashire and in London. Very sadly, her life was plagued by quite a lot of illness, and she lost her right leg to polio when she was just 33, and she had breast cancer in her 40s. But despite these disadvantages, she volunteered to be a member of the fire service during the war. In fact, like Anthony Buckeridge, the author of the Jennings books, something that they have in common. So there were 39 William books published between 1922 and 1970. So they cover quite a broad range of the century. They are incredibly popular. They've sold 12 million copies in the UK alone. And what is interesting about them is that the books seem to cover a large number of social changes, if you like. The social changes that they cover between 1920 and 1970 reflect the change in society in which William grew up, but he himself stays at the age of 11, just in a way similar to Jennings, who was sort of caught in a similar kind of time warp, always in Form 3. William remains 11 years old while society changes around him. So we've got in the early books this very kind of 1920s society of Agatha Christie world, you know, big houses, cooks and gardeners, rambling countryside. By the late 1960s, when the last books in the series come out, William is staging his own television show and meeting pop singers. So quite a few changes happening there. William is the youngest son of the Brown family, and by nature he's a bit of a rebel, a bit of a tearaway. He doesn't like following rules, but he has, I think, an innate sense of doing the right thing, even if he is slightly not malicious, but slightly mischievous. I don't think he ever veers into genuine malice. I think he sometimes is unthinking about the consequences of his actions. He's quite restless. He's constantly seeking new ways of entertaining himself when life around him is seen as quite boring. And I empathise with that. Growing up in the countryside, in the middle of Kent, where life could at times be quite boring, and so William was one of my heroes. He has two older siblings, Robert and Ethel, who are, I think, late teens, early 20s, and William is something of an irritation to them, but there are signs of genuine affection between them, and the love lives of the older siblings occasionally feature as a plot point in the books. William has a gang of friends who are called the Outlaws, and they have to swear an oath to be part of this gang, and they have a headquarters in a place called the Old Barn, and the Outlaws' names are Ginger, Douglas, and Henry. Ginger is his closest friend in a way. I think Ginger comes across as being his best friend. He's the one we sort of learn the most about, apart from William. Douglas and Henry, we tend not to hear so much about them. They don't appear in as many of the stories. There are some stories that have just William on his own, some with just William and Ginger, some with three of them, William, Ginger, and Douglas, and some with William, Ginger, Douglas, and Henry. It's very rare that you get any other combinations. He also has a loyal dog called Jumble, who accompanies him on his adventures. And what I like about the books really is that they encapsulate a much more innocent time, when children could just disappear off and roam around the countryside with no expectation of when they'd be back, not even any kind of telephone contact, and William, as I say, doesn't like being told what to do. He doesn't like authority, but he has an innate sense of right and wrong, and he will always try to be helpful. A lot of the stories are about William trying to be helpful, even if he doesn't always do the right thing. He has an arch enemy who is a sort of pudgy looking boy called Hubert Lane, and Richmal Crompton does a great job of making us really despise Hubert Lane, making him really quite an unpleasant character. And William's other nemesis, if you like, is a girl called Violet Elizabeth Bott, who is a ginger-haired girl who has the famous catchphrase, "I'll scream and scream until I'm thick." William sometimes has to kind of tolerate Violet Elizabeth for his own purposes, and they have a bit of a love-hate relationship. People of a certain age will remember, of course, the character of Violet Elizabeth, made famous by the actress Bonnie Langford in the late 1970s TV adaptation of the William books. And perhaps unfairly, Bonnie Langford rather got saddled with this Violet Elizabeth image throughout her life, especially when she got the part of Mel in Doctor Who 10 years after that, when her aptitude for screaming very loudly, which is a great asset in a Doctor Who companion, made people reference that Violet Elizabeth catchphrase, "I'll scream and scream until I'm thick." Bonnie Langford, of course, has now established herself as a great acclaimed actress, particularly through her work with EastEnders, and is a very striking looking mature woman, and miles away from the Violet Elizabeth kind of appearance. The other main female character in the books is Joan Clive, the dark-haired girl for whom William sort of carries a bit of a torch for Joan, and Joan is seen as one of the allies of the Outlaws. I think she's even sworn the outlaw oath. At one point in the book, she goes away to boarding school, but she's still able to come back and take part in William's adventures during her holidays. Now, like the Jennings books, these books are timeless, and they've been reissued through decades, and some editions are faithful to the look and the feel of the original books. Now, there's an edition here that I've got, which is based on the late 70s television version. That's Adrian Dannat on the cover there, who played William in the 78-79 adaptation. And yeah, I mean, I'm not sure he's not quite how I pictured William being, really. He's not quite sort of I imagine William more sort of thin-faced and slightly scruffier, but he was right for a lot of people anyway. There's Adrian Dannett again on the cover of Just William, the very first of the William books. We then have some reissues of the books in the 80s and 90s. Here's William IV, which has a more kind of old-fashioned cover on it there, you can see. The Armada paperbacks, which I used to collect in the 1970s, they went through a stage of giving William and his friends a bit of a modern overhaul, with jeans and trainers. I'll show you the cover of William the Pirate. There it is, making him look like he's a 1970s child. And I think the double denim and the trainers, it's not very successful, I think, to my mind, and that's not really how I pictured William at all. The books, it's fair to say, haven't in one respect stood the test of time completely, because there are some things which have caused a bit of controversy. In 1999, there was a bit of an outcry. It was the 80th anniversary of Richmal Crompton's first William story, and there were some facsimile edition re-releases, which caused some people to have a few issues about the content. There is one of the early stories called The Show in the first book, where William in fact paints his dog blue and invites people to pay a penny to come and see the incredible blue dog. Animal rights campaigners, it's fair to say, were not particularly keen on this, nor on the scene in the story The Stolen Whistle, in which William sets his dog on a flock of sheep. But that rather pales in comparison to the most notorious William story of all. In 1935, William and his outlaws decided that they were going to become Nazis. Yes, in a way. There is a story called William and the Nasties. Obviously, that's his hearing of the word Nazi, and they take to emulating Hitler and the National Socialists in basically, not to put too fine a point on it, terrorizing a local sweet shop owner, Mr. Isaacs, who is portrayed in a really unpleasantly stereotypical way. He's described as having a hooked nose. He's described as being mean. You know, it's really awful stereotypes about Jewish people. And it was published in a magazine, first of all, this story. It was published in 1934, and then it was reprinted in the 1935 collection, William the Detective. And it continued to be reprinted, actually, for the next 50 years or so, so that, you know, it wasn't picked up on as being inappropriate. It was actually dropped. Well, I mean, this edition of William the Detective, which is the collection that it first appeared in, this is the Macmillan edition from 1986, which I have. It has Thomas Henry's original lovely illustrations in there, but if you look down the contents page, it does not in fact contain William and the Nasties. So by 1986, this story had been deemed as inappropriate and had been dropped. Knowing how today young adult and middle grade novels have sensitivity reads, one can only imagine what they would have made of William and the Nasties. It is important to point out there is a kind of moral message to the story, because the boys do eventually realize that what they're doing is wrong. There's a passage here which I've got, which I think shows this. A strange distaste for the whole adventure was creeping over the outlaws. Even the thought of the bullseyes and licorice all sorts failed to raise their drooping spirits. It does seem a bit like ordinary stealing, said Ginger, voicing their doubts. What actually happens at the end of the story is that the boys sneak into the sweet shop, and they think they're locking Mr. Isaacs into a cupboard. What they've actually done is intercepted a burglar and locked him into a cupboard. And the person upstairs, who they think is a hostage, turns out to be Mr. Isaacs, who is incredibly grateful for all of this, and he rewards the boys with all the sweets they can carry. But, you know, all the same, the story does leave a very, very nasty taste in the mouth, and it is probably the right decision that it's been quietly forgotten. So that story aside, the episodic nature of short stories means that they're very easily adapted for television and radio, so they've been kept in the public eye in that way. People will probably be aware of the Martin Jarvis readings, which are on BBC Radio and have been reissued on CD and download and so on. There have been several television adaptations, all quite faithful to the books, or at least to the spirit of the books, notably, as I mentioned, in the late 70s with Adrian Dannat, in 1994 with Oliver Rokeson playing William, and in 2010 with Daniel Roche, of course, who's famous from Outnumbered. There is a Just William Society, www.justwilliamsociety.co.uk. Every year they organise a meeting, it's on their website, to which all William fans are invited. There are books, talks, news, discussions, and the acting of one of the radio plays. So great to go and have a look at that website if you're interested. The books are still widely available, both as the audio collections and in the various different hardback and paperback editions. What you pay for them, what you expect to pay for them will vary very wildly, of course, depending on the condition and where you get them from. The very latest reissues are, I think, from 2015, and they retail at very reasonable £6 or thereabouts. But even the facsimile, the facsimiles going back to the 80s and 90s can be found going for ridiculous prices on some websites. In fact, even these Macmillan paperbacks from the 80s can go for quite ridiculous prices sometimes. So there we are. That's a little overview of the William books. I haven't read all of them by any means. There are still quite a few gaps in my knowledge of the William series, so I intend to come back and get through them all at some point. I think with the Jennings books, I pretty much read them all. The William books, I didn't always manage to track down all of them. But yeah, a very important part of my childhood, and a childhood hero of mine, I think, a few sort of missteps aside. Now, when I carry on this series of the Blythe Bookshelf, I'm also going to be talking about some comics that I used to read, and other books and book series. I'm also going to be coming a bit more up to date, talking about some present day children's books and books for adults as well, which I'm going to be reviewing. I should mention as well that there is going to be a small spin-off as well. I'm going to do a spin-off of shorter videos. In the last video, I talked about the Doctor Who Target books. I'm also going to be doing a little spin-off series in which I look at each of the Target Doctor Who novelizations in turn in a bit more detail, looking at them in story broadcast order rather than in book publication order. So I'll be starting with An Unearthly Child by Terrance Dicks, which was the story was the first story, even though that wasn't the first book published. So there we go. Hope you've enjoyed that today, and please do like the video and subscribe, and there will be more Blythe Bookshelf, and there will be more Blythe tapes as well, interviews with other writers forthcoming over the next few months. Thank you very much.